Good day, everyone. My name is Kila Reyes, and I am here to introduce to you our topic, which is about applied ethics, business ethics, environmental ethics, and research ethics. But before we jump to our topic, let me discuss a little information about ethics. So, morality is an inextricable part of human existence. Humans are social beings who interact with one another. We can help but make judgments about what is right and what is wrong, what one should do, and what is worthwhile as human beings. We begin to reflect on our moral judgments and actions when we engage in ethics. Why? Is this behavior right? What is the justification for this act? Can this behavior be justified? Thus, ethics is the morality of our reflection. On the other hand, applied ethics is the art or science of reflecting on moral dilemmas and moral problems in different social contexts. One of the most influential philosophers in the field of applied ethics is James Childress. He defines applied ethics as the term applied ethics and practical ethics are used interchangeably to indicate the application of ethics to special arenas of human activity, such as business, politics, medicine, and to particular problems such as abortion. Childress, 1986. So, however, one phrase in Childress' definition warrants additional consideration. What does Childress means when he says that applied ethics indicates the application of ethics to special arenas of human activity? So the expression mirrors perhaps an oversimplified, deductive view of applied ethics. The view that applied in ethics is just an application of ethical theory to practical problem has been questioned by many authors. In contrast to Childress, these authors stressed that for the sake of relevance, an applied ethics presupposes an interplay between theory and practice, experience and reflection, and intuitions about and principles. On the other hand, we have Tom Bouchon suggests the following definition of applied ethics. He defined applied ethics refers to any use of to philosophical methods to treat moral problems, practices, policies in the professions, technology, government, and the like. Bouchon, 2003. However, he adds that also other methods can be used. However, against the background of the recent tendencies of multidisciplinary research in applied ethics, attaining well-grounded conclusion requires using various methods. When and why did ethics appear? In a famous expression, philosopher Stephen Tolman said that medicine saved the life of ethics. Tolman, 1986. In the 1960s, the academic discipline of ethics was in decline. Most moral philosophers worked in the concept and epistemological questions. Not many were engaged in normative ethics, and even fewer bothered to analyze moral problems in the real world. As a consequence, many people considered academic ethics a peculiar philosophical subject. During the 20th century, the Western world experienced a period of secularization. So, let's jump to our topic. What is business ethics? Business ethics is the behavior that a business adheres to its daily dealings with the world. The ethics of a particular business can be diverse. They apply not only to how the business interacts with the world at large, but also their one-on-one dealings with a single customer. On the other hand, environmental ethics focuses on questions concerning on how we ought to inhabit the world. What constitutes a good life or a good society, and who, where, or what merits moral standings. While research ethics is a kind of applied ethics or practical ethics, meaning that it attempts to resolve not merely general issues but also specific problems that arise in the conduct of research. Its goal is to determine that the moral acceptability and appropriateness of specific conduct and to establish the actions an moral agent ought to take in the particular situation. Research ethics is therefore not merely theoretical. It aims to establish practical and moral norms and standards for the conduct of research.
Applied ethics has expanded the study of ethics beyond the realms of academic philosophical discourse. The four-principle approach, commonly termed principalism, entails consideration and application of four prima facie ethical principles: autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. Applied ethics is the mark out of ethics is general by its special focus on issue of practical concern. It is concerned with ethical issues in various fields of human life, including medical ethics, business ethics, and environmental ethics. Philosophers who study applied ethics look the world around them and analyze ethical problems. By doing so, the applied ethics ethicist is able to use philosophy as a tool to address important moral issues in various practical disciplines.
Business ethics. Business ethics is a form of applied ethics or professional ethics that examines ethical principles and moral or ethical problems that arise in a business environment. It applies to all aspects of business conduct and is relevant to the conduct of individuals and the entire organization. Principles of business ethics. This ensures that businesses gain money without affecting the individuals or society as a whole. The ethics involved in these businesses reflect the philosophy of that organization. One of these policies determines the fundamentals of that organization. As a result, businesses often have ethical principles. So there are 12 ethical principles of business. First is honesty. Be honest in all communications and actions. Integrity. Maintain personal integrity. Promise keeping and trustworthiness. Keep promises and fulfill commitment. Loyalty. Be loyal within the framework of other ethical principles. Fairness. Strive to be fair and just in all dealings. Concern for others. Demonstrate compassion and genuine concern for the well-being of others. Respect for others. Treating everyone with respect. Law-abiding. Commitment to excellence. Pursue excellence in all the time, in all things. Leadership. Reputation and moral. Build and protect company's good reputation, the moral of its employee. And lastly, accountability. Being accountable. Scope of business ethics. Ethics in compliance is about obeying and adhering to rules and authority. The motivational being compliant could be to do the right thing out of the fear of being caught rather than a desire to be abiding by the law. Ethics in finance. So this talks about financial behavior or activities that are ethically right or wrong. It is generally used for describing finance, which takes into account the ethical channelization of financial returns along with the ESG or environmental, social, and governance factors. So the ethical issues in finance that companies and employees are confronted with include in accounting, window dressing, misleading financial analysis, related party transactions not at arm's length, insider trading, securities fraud, leading to manipulation of the financial markets, executive compensation, bribery, kickbacks, overbilling of expenses, facilitation payments, and lastly, fake reimbursements. Ethics in human resources. Human resource management plays a decisive role in introducing and implementing ethics. Ethics should be a pivotal issue for HR specialists. The ethics of human resource management covers those ethical issues arising around the employer-employees relationship, such as the rights and duties owed between employer and the employees. This includes discrimination issues, discrimination in the basis of age, gender, race, religion, disabilities, weight, and etc. Sexual harassment, affirmative action, issues surrounding the representation of employees and the democratization of the workplace, issues affecting the privacy of the employee, such as workplace surveillance, drug testing, issues affecting the privacy of the employer, such as whistleblowing, issues relating to the fairness of the employment contract and the balance of power between employer and the employee, and lastly, occupational safety and health. Next is ethics in marketing. Ethics in marketing. It helps increase retention because employees feel eager and willing to help sell the product or service. More and more employees express the need for making a difference of being useful to society. So this includes pricing, price fixing, price discrimination, price skimming, anti-competitive practices like manipulation of supply, exclusive dealing arrangement, tying arrangements, etc., misleading advertisements, content of advertisements, children and marketing, black markets and gray markets. Next is ethics of production. Ethics in production is a subset of business ethics that is meant to ensure that production, function, or activities are not damaging the consumer or the society. Like other ethics, there is a certain code of conduct or standards to be followed. However, ensuring that the ethics are complied with is often difficult. Defective, addictive, and inherently dangerous products. Ethical relations between the company and the environment include pollution, environmental ethics, and carbon emissions trading. Ethical problems arising out of new technologies, for example, genetically modified food. And lastly, product testing ethics. Ethics in IPR or intellectual property knowledge and skills. This refers to patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets of which are legal means meant to protect unique ideas, inventions, and other non-tangible property.
So hello everyone, my name is Mary Claire Sardani, and now we are going to tackle about the types of ethics. There are three types of ethics. These are the transactional ethics, participatory ethics, and recognitional ethics. The first type of ethics is transactional ethics. Here, all parties is involved in the action pattern have interest happens that coincide in the time, but that do not affect each or other. In order to let each party's transaction run smoothly, all parties have to accept the principle of equality. In order to run things smoothly, following principles requires honesty and reciprocity. Transactional ethics is the honest behavior you portray when you speak to your customers or clients when you indulge in any materialistic transaction. It's simple not fooling people for your business benefits, living on the grounds of equal importance to the customers and revealing the facts. Next is participatory ethics. It provides idea about how to mediate between business goals and moral demands and how to serve the society in more ethical way and gain corporate excellence. For example, the Ford Foundation. A participatory ethics suggests otherwise and represents a commitment to addressing the differential power imbalances and privileges between researchers and reforming issues of protection in terms of personal and political responsibility. The next is the moral interaction. As a matter of shielding individual liberty and yielding public welfare, according to the view, the rights of individuals and our duty to do or individuals supersede personal egocentric interests. So next is the field of ethics. We have three fields of ethics. These are the descriptive ethics, normative ethics, analytic ethics. So in descriptive ethics, there are different society have different standards. Next. Next, please. Descriptive ethics. The category of descriptive ethics is the easiest to understand. It simply involves describing how people behave and course of moral standards they claim to follow. Descriptive ethics incorporate research from the fields of anthropology, psychology, sociology, and history as part of the process of understanding what people do and have believed about moral norms. Next is the next ethics is the normative ethics. The category of normative ethics involve creating, evaluating moral standards. This it is the attempt to figure out what people should do or whether their current moral behavior is reasonable. Traditionally, most of the field of moral philosophy has involved normative ethics. There are few philosophers who haven't tried their hand at explaining what they think people should do and why. Next and last so analytic the category of analytic refers to mathematics. It perhaps the most difficult of the three to understand. In fact, some philosophers disagree as to whether or not it should be considered an independent pursuit, arguing that it should instead be included under normative ethics. Nevertheless, it is discussed independently often enough that it deserves its own discussion here. So next, sources of ethical standards. So we have five ethical standards. The five sources of ethical standards. These are the utilitarian approach, the right approach, the fairness of justice approach, the common good approach, and the virtue of approach. So the utilitarian approach assesses an action in terms of its consequences or outcomes, the net benefits and costs to all stakeholders on an individual level. It strives to achieve the greatest good of the greatest number while creating the less amount of the harm of preventing the greatest. Next is the right approach. The right approach focuses on respect for human dignity. This approach holds that our dignity is based on our ability to choose freely how we live our lives, and that we have a moral right to respect for our choices as free, equal, and rational people, and a moral duty to respect others in same way. Next is the fairness of or justice approach. Has its roots in the teaching of the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, who said that equals should be treated equals and equally. The basic moral question is the approach is how far is an action? Next is the common good approach. It refers to actions that are taken or policies that are put into place in order to benefit not only a certain group of individuals, but the society as whole. The common good approach includes policies on certain outlets that allow for improving the quality of citizens' lives. The last sources The last is the virtue approach. The virtue approach argues us to pay attention to the contours of our community and the habits of community of characters they encourage and instill. The moral life, then it is not simply a matter of following moral rules and of learning to apply them to specific situation. So next. So this quote is approached by Henry Ford. A business that makes nothing but money is poor kind of business. Next. So these are the factors in influencing business ethics. We have leadership, individual characteristic, environment, corporate culture, strategy, and performance. So in leadership is um, leadership. This is the virtue approach argues and pay attention to the away. Next, please. So we have here the factors in influencing business ethics. We have here the corporate culture, strategy and performance, environment, leadership, and individual characteristics. Next, please. So we have here ethics. Goodwill. It means to act out of the sense of moral obligation or duty. In other words, the moral agent does a particular action not because of what it produces in terms of human experience, but because the agent recognizes by reasoning that it is the morally right thing to do, and consequently there is a moral duty or obligation to do that action. Next is the profitability. High standards of organizational ethics can contribute to profitability by reducing the cost of business transactions, building a foundation of trust with stakeholders, contributing to an internal environment of successful teamwork, and maintaining a social capital that is part of an organization, marketplace, and niche. Next is the survival of business. Business ethics enhance the law of outlining acceptable behavior integrity among their employees and gain trust from key stakeholders, such as investors and consumers. While corporate ethics programs have become common, the quality varies. Next is the healthy competition. Healthy competition between business encourage good customer services, quality products, and fair pricing. By making positive connections with others in your field, you have a chance to assess the differences between you and your competitors. Next is the customer satisfaction. Good ethics dictates that a salesperson should help customers find the most suitable product for the needs, not necessarily the only that results in the greatest revenue or highest profit margins for the company. Precisely meeting customers' needs translate into higher customer satisfaction. Customers' right. Customer protection is the practice of safeguarding buyers of goods and services, and the public against unfair practices in the marketplace. Such law are intended to prevent businesses from engaging in fraud or specified under practices in order to gain an advantage over competitors to mislead consumers. Next is the protecting employees and shareholders. Protecting employees and shareholders in business ethics are required to protect the interests of employees, shareholders, competitors, dealers, suppliers, and etc. It protects them from exploitation through unfair trade practices. Next is the smooth function of business. Employees make better decisions in less with business ethics as a guiding principle. When employees complete work in a way that is based on honesty and integrity, the whole organization will be benefited. So next is the consumer movement. The term consumer movement refers only to the non-profit advocacy groups and grassroots activism to promote consumer interests by reforming the practices of corporations or policies of the government. So the consumer movement is a subset of the discipline of consumerism. Last is the importance of labor. The purpose of business ethics is to ensure the consistent moral attitude within the company from the executive level, management to new hires. It helps to ensure environment is treated with respect, fairness, and honesty. Next. Next, please. So these are the 7 dangers to human virtue here in wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, business without ethics, science without humanity, religion without sacrifice, politics without principle. So here is we have joy, the peace, the wisdom, compassion, openness, honest, and heart. That's all, and thank you.
Good day. So now we are going to discuss about environmental ethics. So environmental ethics is the study of ethical questions raised by human relations with a non-human environment. Emerged as an important subfield of philosophy during the 1970s. It is now a flourishing area of research. It examines both anthropocentric and non-anthropocentric claims about that has values, as well as divergent views about whether environmental ethics should be concerned with bringing about test consequences, respecting principles and rights, or embodying environmental virtues. And we do have the first, understanding value in environmental ethics, and the second one, we do have human values in environmental ethics. So for the understanding value in environmental ethics, we do have also two kinds: the interpretations of intrinsic value and the intrinsic value as moral status. So first, the interpretations of intrinsic value, the claim that the environment or parts of it has intrinsic value has been centrally important. However, this term can be and has been used in a number of significantly different ways. Intrinsic value may be understood as a properly contrasted with instrumental value, where instrumental value is the value that something has being a means to our ends. Those who claim that the environment has intrinsic value in this sense deny that it exists merely as a human resource. Still, others regard intrinsic value not as a matter of where something gets its value or the metaphysical status of its value, but rather to mean the lexical priority of its value over kinds of value. In this view, to say that something has intrinsic value is to say that its value is more important than more instrumental or intrinsic values. So the idea here is that things are intrinsically valuable ought to be valued differently. Thought not necessarily valued more than extrinsically valuable things. However, metaphysical understandings of intrinsic value and its interpretation in terms of lexical priority have both been much criticized for failures in terms of both metaphysical and moral justification, and are not now widely accepted. So the second one, we have here the intrinsic value as moral status. So the term intrinsic value is also sometimes taken to mean having moral status or moral considerability. To say that something has moral status normally means that it should be taken directly into account in our decision making. In most accounts, something that has moral status is understood to have interest or a good of its own. Things can go better or worse for it, although better and worse can be understood in different ways. So to say that something has moral status is not, however, necessarily to say that it has moral rights. From its earliest days until present, environmental ethics has been concerned not only with what value means, but also with what actually has value and with the implications, such as values may have more for human relations and human behavior. Almost everyone agrees that every human beings have high moral significance and that ethical issues arise when some human actions involving the environment negatively impact other humans. However, if some or all of the environment is thought to have intrinsic value, additional ethical issues are raised. So the second one, as I said earlier, we do have here human values in environmental ethics. So we also have two kinds of human values in environmental ethics. First, we do have the idea of anthropocentrism, and the second one, we do have the environmental justice and sustainability. So the idea of anthropocentrism is the term anthropocentrism can be used to refer to worldviews and attitudes, to intrinsic values, or to moral status and significance. So the argument that anthropocentric attitudes such as that humans have dominion over nature lie at the root of environmental problems has historically been influential in environmental ethics. One common form of anthropocentrism claims that only human beings have intrinsic value. Perhaps the most popular way of understanding anthropocentrism, however, has been as a claim about moral status and or moral significance. These forms of anthropocentrism maintain either that only human beings have moral status, or that human beings are much more morally significant than any other living things. Significant environmental ethics problems exist even for those who are anthropocentric. Human interactions with the environment generate substantial interhuman justice issues, both between existing people and between present and future people, and justice issues are a core concern of environmental ethics. So, the term anthropocentric in environmental ethics has often been understood to carry negative valence. Hostility to it has been so widespread, and it has been argued that non-anthropocentrism is a dogma of environmental ethics. However, a number of environmental ethicists strongly defend form of anthropocentric ethics. Many of these philosophers are known as environmental pragmatists. So the second one, we do have here the environmental justice and sustainability. So environmental justice is a key concern of environmental ethics. It is defined by the U.S. or the United States Environmental Protection Agency as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. As this definition indicates, there are both distributive and participative justice issues involving the environment. Some environmental ethicists have suggested that we stand in justice relation to non-human environmental entities such as species and ecological systems. If they do not have moral status, then they cannot be due justice. However, even if they have moral status, it does not follow that they are appropriate recipient of justice, because one could hold that justice only applies to a subset of beings that have moral status.
So I am Kimberly K. Receipt, and my topic is non-human values in environmental ethics. Non-human values in environmental ethics. So several recent calls have been made for bioethics to grapple seriously with various of non-human ethics, including animal ethics and environmental ethics. Bioethics traditionally treats clinical and research ethics. And apart from animal experimentation, non-human ethics is often seen as outside its purview. Alright, let's proceed. Ethics in sentient animals. So first is we will talk about what is sentient animals. So sentient animals are aware of their feelings and emotions. These could be negative feelings such as pain, frustration, and fear. It is logical to purpose that sentient animals also enjoy feelings of comfort, enjoyment, contentment, and perhaps even great delight in joy. Science shows us some interesting abilities in farm animals. Sheep can recognize up to 50 sheep's faces and remember them for 2 years. Cows shows excitement when they discover how to open a gate leading to a food reward. And lastly, mother hens teach their chicks which food are good to eat. Ethics and sentient animals. One key approach to environmental ethics focuses on the moral status and ethical treatment of individual animals. Most commonly, moral status is attributed on the basis of animals subjected to experimental welfare, particularly animals' capacity to feel pain. For shorthand, we call this sentience. Singer's animal liberation first championed this view in recent ethical debates. Singer argued that beings who can express sufferings and pleasure have morally relevant interest, and that where beings have similar interest, irrespective of species, and these interests should be taken equally into account. This argument both attributed high moral significance to non-human sentient animals and underpinned Singer's claim that focuses moral significance on species membership rather than on the position of sentience is speciesism. The basic idea that sentience is a sufficient condition for moral status is widely accepted in environmental ethics, even by those who do not regard it is a necessary condition. Sentience is not the only morally relevant capacity that can be attributed to animals. Singers also argues that in addition to sentience, some animals are self-conscious and have preferences to live, and that killing a being that has a sense of itself has a distinct entity with a future and that prefers to live is worse than killing a being without such a preferences. In an alternative and highly significant account, Tom Regan argued that all adult mammals have equal moral significance because they are what he calls experiencing subject of a life. He takes this to encompass being able to feel pain, to have desires, to have ends of one's own, to have memories and expectations, and to have a sense of oneself as persisting over time. Another recent group of relations positioned in environmental ethics argue that although we have some basic obligations to all sentient animals, we have additional or stronger obligations towards certain animals, not on the basis of their capacities, but rather because of their special relations with them. For instance, animals that we have domesticated. Although almost everyone agrees that some non-human animals are sentient, it is sometimes argued that possessing sentience is not morally relevant, or that sentience does not provide the basic for much moral significance, even though it is sufficient for moral status. For this ethicist, what matters ethically is, for instance, being able to recognize and respect another's moral worth, or being a rational language user. But as for Nathan Nobis, the others point out this objection also raises concern about the moral significance of certain human beings, infants, and those with severe mental disabilities, who are equally unable to recognize and respect others' moral worth. Among environmental ethicists, a further objection is that an ethical focus on individual humans and animals is not environmental at all. From biocentric perspectives, it is argued that sentience centered views draw the scope of morally relevant individuals too narrowly. From more holistic views, such as a ecocentrism, it is maintained that the focus on individuals is eventually inappropriate. We should instead focus on ecological wholes, such as ecosystems. So let's proceed to ethical biocentrism. Biocentrism refers to all environmental ethics that extend the status of moral object from human beings to all other living things in nature. In narrow sense, it emphasizes the value and rights of organic individuals, believing that moral priority should be given to the survival of individual living beings. Ethical biocentrism is used to describe ethical positions in which all living things have moral status. One early form of ethical biocentrism, based on the idea of reverence for life, was proposed by Albert Schweitzer in The Philosophy of Civilization. Though unified by a focus on the ethical importance of individual living things, these approaches disagree about what characterizes a living thing and why those characteristic might be thought of as morally relevant, whether some living things are more morally significant than others, and whether the value of life is just one among a broader, plural set of values convey moral relevance, or it is the only such value. Although exact interpretations differ, most biocentric ethicists argue that all living things can be benefited and harmed, that therefore they have interest or a good of their own, and that this good is something we should respect. A significant divide exists, nevertheless, between those who argue that all living things are equal value and those who maintain that some living things are more morally significant than others. Nathan Taylor argues for a position of biocentric egalitarianism, a view shared by James Turba. However, most contemporary biocentric ethicists disagree, arguing that the possession of more complex psychological capacities, such as sentience, gives beings that possess them a higher level of moral significance. So, this movement to egalitarianism helps avoid some common objections to biocentrism. For instance, it is often argued that biocentric egalitarianism is completely impractical because we cannot avoid constantly harming living things, that it is simply absurd to think that we must take the welfare of bacteria into account, particularly if we are to regard them as of equal significance to connectively complex animals, and that biocentric egalitarianism wrongly includes morally relevant considerations, such as sentience and self awareness. Based on this and the rules of biocentric egalitarianism, plants have the right to not be harmed. Animals have the right not to be harmed or hurt. Humans have these same rights, but they also need a negative right corresponding to their ability to reason. However, in egalitarianism, biocentrism avoids this critic. Being alive need not to be the only criterion for moral significance. And Exerbia coli and a wolf are both alive, and this may be morally relevant, but additionally, that wolves have a mind or brain, and both sentient and social may also be relevant. And I think that maintains it is no worse to kill a wolf than a collie. Most surely be misguided. Even though biocentric ethicists want to hold on to egalitarianism in principle, they often adopt practical principles that appear to conflict with egalitarianism principles that prioritize some living things over others. This has led to changes of inconsistency. And egalitarianism views, however, appear to have plausible response to the above objections. So let us now proceed to holistic ethics, ecocentrism. So some leading forms of environmental ethics argue that our moral focus should not be on individual organism but on ecological collectives, ecosystems, or the land. Aldo Leopold extends that moral sphere outward from the human community to include the biotic community. The land ethics simply enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soils, waters, plants, and animals, or collectively the land. Leopold famously defends a land ethic in which a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. This is not to say that Leopold thought individuals or human individuals at least are ethically irrelevant. He is usually interpreted as arguing that we also ethically need to take the land directly into account. Although this interpretation is occasionally disputed in favor of seeing Leopold as an anthropocentric pragmatist. So, Leopold's ecocentric and highly suggestive ethic was not systematic. In particular, he did not suggest way to resolving any conflict between individuals and the land. Modern environmental ethicists have endeavored to develop a more secure underpinning for ecocentric ethics. These accounts to why ecological communities or ecosystems should be accorded moral status differ considerably. So, Calliot argues, drawing on Hume and Darwin, that just as we have emotional loyalties and moral responsibilities toward the human communities in which we are located, so too we should have such loyalties and responsibilities to the ecological communities of which we are also members. Ralston focuses on ecosystem as wild processes that create and nurture life. We should not value the organism, the products of the system, without recognizing the systematic value of the process that produced them. However, such ecocentric views are often seen as problematic. One difficulty concerns what an ecological community or an ecosystem might be thought to be, and other in whether it is the kind of thing which we can attribute interest. Some have raised question about whether ecosystems are sufficiently cohesive, unified, and bounded for us to think of them as having interest of their own. Although concepts such as ecosystem health and ecosystem integrity are often used to refer to what is good for ecosystems, it can be argued that these are merely metaphors that portray human references as thought they were in the interest of ecosystems. Another issue concerns how we can justify the kind and level of ecological organizations that ought to be the focus of our ethical attention. Given that there are many different ways of delineating ecosystem, topographically, by tropic hierarchies, by nutrient budgets, by energy flow patterns, as well as many different kinds of ecological wholes. In addition to ecosystems, communities, biomes, ecotopes, etc., which is the right one to serve as the basis for assessing interest. The more distant, incoherent, rapidly changing, and arbitrarily defined ecosystem or communities seems to be, the more difficult certain kinds of ecocentric ethics become to maintain. Specifically, those that depend on the idea of ecosystem having a good or interest that can be set back or damaged. Alright, holistic ethics species. Many environmental ethicists who define ecocentrism also define holism with respect to species, arguing that species have value distinct from that of the individual organism that comprises them. Species and populations are certainly instrumentally valuable. They provide food, medicine, shelter, recreation, enjoyable experience, knowledge, and more. The question here is whether they have value not based on their usefulness to us. There are two ways in which both ecosystem and species have non-instrumental value. They might have interest or a good of their own that we ought to care about, which is the moral status. Or they might be valuable in their own right, even if they lack interest. Another form of intrinsic value. So the claim that species have interest distinct from the organism that comprises them faces challenges, rather like those raised by the claim that ecosystems have interest distinct from the organism that constitute them. For one thing, it is not always easy to define the boundaries of species. There are a number of different species concepts: ecological, genetic, phylogenetic, reproductive, and so on, that divide living things up to somewhat differently. Sorry for that. However, pluralism in species concept does not itself mean that there is not one that might be more important or useful in ethics, just as there are more useful ones in ecological or evolutionary biology. In fact, most proponents of the direct worth of value of species emphasizes the concept that species are distinctive forms of life. So in this view, what makes two organisms conspecific is that they are genetically related individuals who share a common evolutionary history and way of going about the world. So, like getting food, avoiding predators, and reproducing. However, even if species can be delineated in this way, it is still not clear whether they are properly regarded as having interest or a good. We commonly talk about species this way as being healthy or as if things are good for them. So however, species that do not have minds, they cannot have psychological interest and they are not alive. So they cannot have biological interest. Individual like wolves, silver maples, and human beings can be harmed and die, but Canis lupus, Acer saccharinum, and Homo sapiens cannot. That difficulties with grounding the interests of species have led many environmental ethicists to doubt whether they do have a good of their own that we should care about. Even if species do not have interest, they may be valuable in other ways. Some species in some places have high cultural, symbolic, and religious importance, and they are valuable for that reason. Particular species or form of life can be valuable for being amazing, beautiful, or rare. These types of values are not instrumental. They are not based on what the species or populations do for us, but they are value dependent. That is, they depend on our culturally, religiously, or aesthetically valuing them. Thus, they are intrinsically valuable in one sense, non-instrumental, but not in other sense, like independent or their relations to another things. However, some theories, most prominently Rollston, have argued that species also have human independent interesting values. These things count whether or not there is anybody to do the counting. In this view, each species is valuable in itself because it is a unique and distinctive form of life resulting from human independent evolutionary processes stretching back into deep time. This is sometimes called natural value. Many environmental ethicists, conservation biologists, and environmentalists find this view compelling. However, this type of value is highly contested. Finally, some theorists have argued that species have distinctive non-instrumental values by virtue of the contribution they make in the biodiversity, which is itself valuable. This is sometimes called contributory of compositional value, Whether this is view is justified depends on biodiversity having non-instrumental value. Moreover, the view is often accused of committing the part whole fallacy. The fact that a whole of composite that has value does not mean that each part that comprises it does. Each person may have inherent worth, but it does not follow that each of their organs or cells does does so as well. The issue of whether species have intrinsic value or moral status is important in environmental ethics because it is this sort of value that would grounds duties and obligations to them. If we have a um, duty of justice to other species or an obligation to them to prevent them from going instinct from anthrop- uh, anthropogenic causes, it must be because they have the value independent of us that makes a claim on us as moral agents. Alright, let us now proceed to the next slide. Wildness value. One other important value here is wildness. Although not directly relevant to moral status, wildness is often argued to be of intrinsic value in some sense and motivates many claims for environmental protection. The idea that wildness or naturalness is of particular value has a long history, especially in the United States. It it is embedded in the U.S. Wilderness Act, which define wilderness as follows. In contrast with those areas where man and his work dominated the landscape, where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. Wildness or naturalness is significant in environmental ethics. Indeed, Kristen goes so far as to maintain that the presumption central to environmental ethic is that human actions need to be circumscribed in such way that the human independent processes remain intact. One difficult issue here is what exactly wildness or naturalness should be taken to mean. Most agree that these terms refer to independence from humans in some sense. In Eliot's influential view, when we value objects or places for their naturalness, we value them because they have not been shaped by human hand. They are not of human origin. Ecological restorations, then, Eliot argues, do not have the same value as the natural originals because they lack continuity with a natural past. So Hettinger and Troop define a broader view of wildness as being not humanized, where humanization means influenced, altered, or controlled by humans. In this view, being of non-human origin is just one way of being wild. And wildness is not absolute, but can come in degrees. The association of wildness with wilderness has been particularly problematic. It has been argued that wildness can be found all around us, even within cities, and that is an understanding of wildness value as excluding humans, as in the traditional U.S. wilderness idea, can lead to the displacement of indigenous people who do or did live in places called wilderness. and is more broadly misanthropic. Others have argued that, especially in an era of global anthropogenic environmental change, continue emphasizes on wildness value and pristine nature is misplaced. We should instead pay more ethical attention to environments influenced by people. Those who define the value of wildness, for instance, McCabe, find the pervasive human impacts of climate change particularly threatening. Even authors who are less inclined geoengineering proposals intentionally to influence global climate as reducing wellness in ethically disturbing ways. Alright, um, hybrid or value pluralist views. Okay, so environmental ethicists have argued for moral status of many different kinds of beings and things and have defended a variety of values. Some positions in environmental ethics are value valuenist, arguing that there are ultimately only one kind of master value, positive sentient experience or flourishing, and that other apparent values can be analyzed in terms of or be reduced to the one value. Others argue instead for forms of a value pluralism wherein different kinds of things and beings may all have moral status. Multiple irreducible values such as rationality or sentience can be simultaneously defended. The central problem for value monist is to identify a master fundamental value, justify its significance, and explain how to translate other values into its terms. The central problem for value pluralists is to provide a way of prioritizing or balancing competing values when they come into conflict. Valueminists generally endorse what is called strong value commensurability because there is a master value. All values end up being commensurable with one another. All values can be measured as one quantity of the master value. So a pluralist view may adopt weak value commensurability, where one can consistently rank value and apply some kind of lexical priority rule where one value or amount of the value is always given priority over another value or amount of the value. Okay. Other value pluralists reject such regular ranking patterns, arguing for different forms of value incommensurability, where value rankings either vary by context. So in some cases, one might prioritize one value. In other cases, a different value. Or rankings cannot be done at all because rational choices cannot be made between them. Value pluralist positions have been widely adopted in environmental ethics on the basis that, as Carter puts it, each value continually exercises its pull. Nothing less, the issue remains unresolved. Alright, so let us now proceed to the ethical theory and environmental ethics. Alright, environmental ethicists have very different views about what has value or moral status. However, this is not the only important divergence of views. and additional differences concern what one should do with the values one adopts. Values need to fit into an ethical theory to guide action. For instance, it's ethics primarily about maximizing what is good and minimizing what is bad. Or alternatively, it is about what we owe to each other as morally important beings or things. Or should ethics instead be understood as being about the development of good character, making ourselves into the best person we can be? Environmental ethicists, like ethicists in general, disagree profoundly about these questions, and these disagreements have shaped and field of environmental ethics. So, in this in this topic, we will going to review the three leading but conflicting approaches to ethical theory, which is the environmental ethics, consequentialism, deontology, and virtue theory. Consequentialism. Consequentialism is the ethical theory that we should aim at bringing about the best consequences through our actions, rules, or practices. Standard form of consequentialism are maximizing. Aim at the best expected outcomes of all available options and require us to take the whole outcome into account, including the outcomes of omitting to do things we could have done. Within this broad description, environmental ethicists have defended different forms of consequentialism, in particular by proposing varying views of good outcomes. Leading consequentialist positions in animal ethics argue either that we should maximize happiness, net of suffering, or what we should maximize satisfied preferences, net of frustrated ones, across all the beings that can suffer or have preferences. However, consequentialist approaches to environmental ethics need not concern either experience or preferences. Atfield argues for a form of biocentric consequentialism where the good to be maximized is organistic flourishing and the bad to be minimized is inhibiting such organismic flourishing, although he notes the flourishing of some organism is of more moral significance than others. And holistic ethical views may also be consequentialist, aiming and maximizing ecosystem health or species flourishing. It has plausibly been argued that Leopold's land ethic, with its outcome oriented advocacy of what tends to be preserved with the integrity, stability, and beauty, itself endorses a form of consequentialism. So, consequentialists have very diverse ideas of what actually contributes the good, even though they are bound together by the forward looking aim at bringing about best outcomes. Alright, let's proceed to the deontological and rights views. In deontological ethics, an action is considered morally good because of some characteristic of the action itself, not because the product of the action is good. Deontological ethics holds that at least some acts are morally obligatory regardless of their consequences for human welfare. Deontological views, by contrast, maintain that maximizing the good is not all that matters and that we are permitted and sometimes required not to maximize the good. Perhaps we were doing so we would require us to be unjust. What matters in this view is that we owe to one another rather than the creation of better or worse states of the world. From a deontological perspective, consequentialist approaches to environmental ethics may create problematic commitments. For example, they may imply that we should minimize wild animal suffering, but ultimately this could require us to manage ecosystems in ways that change their structure, including reducing the number of pain inflicting carnivorous animals or feeding wild animals in times when food is scarce. Deontological thinkers may argue that this is interfering in ecological matters, that we are not our moral business. Deontological theories in environmental ethics emphasizes rules, principles, duties, rights, or some combination of this, rather than maximizing the good. Right theories form from most important group of views here, particularly those maintaining that humans have environmental rights. Hayward, for example, argues that humans have a right to an environment etiquette for health and well-being, and that this right should be constitutionalized. The idea that there are no good grounds for denying some non-human animals the basic rights that humans are believed to have, such as the right not to be tortured, killed, or confined, has also been widely defended. So Donaldson and Kim Laika moved beyond this, arguing for citizenship rights for domesticated animals in addition to the basic rights that all animals are argued to have. Cochrane, on the other hand, argues that although animals have basic rights, these rights do not include the right to liberty because animals are not autonomous subjects. Although accounts of animals' rights differ. For example, in terms of whether keeping companion animals violates their rights. All agree that right position gives animal very powerful protections against being killed for food or use in painful experiments. This view can cause conflict with other positions in environmental ethics, particularly where it is argued that sentient animals are causing damage to ecosystem or driving species to extinction. When sentient animals become invasive. In such cases, ecocentric ethicists argue that animals should be killed, but animals' rights theorists maintain that killing violates animals' rights. Deontological approaches are not confined to human or animal rights, although rights language is rarely used for consentient living entities. Taylor, for instance, argues that we have duties to respect individual living organisms and that these organisms cannot be entered into calculations for maximizing the good. Alright, so let us now proceed to virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is person rather than action based. It looks at the virtue of moral character or the person carrying out an action, rather than ethical duties and rules, or the consequences of particular actions. A good person is someone who lives virtuously, who possesses and lives the virtues. Virtue ethics has recently undergone a significant revival and has been strongly taken up by environmental ethicists. beginning with Hill's paper, The Ideals of Human Excellence and Preserving Natural Environments. So, in the past decade, the series of papers and numbers of important books arguing for environmental virtue ethics have been published, most prominently Sandler's book, which is The Character and Environment, a virtue-oriented approach to environmental ethics. In a virtue ethics, so approach, actions, practices, and policies are evaluated in terms of whether they express or achieve virtue, as opposed to whether they promote appropriate consequences or conform to duty. For example, when evaluating different forms of animal agriculture, a virtue ethics approach asked which virtues are imperative: compassion, ecological sensitivity, and efficiency, and then what form of method animal agriculture best accomplishes this. Thus, the normative or prescriptive content of virtue ethics comes from substantive accounts of the character traits that are virtues: respect, humility, compassion, courage, ecological sensitivity, efficiency, and simplicity. And those that are vice, callousness, short-sightedness, arrogance, cowardice, profligacy, and laziness. Therefore, much research in environmental virtue ethics involves specifying which character traits are virtues and dispositions, cognitive, like affective, practical, and cognitive, that constitute them. Decisions concerning which character traits are understood as virtues and which are vices are closely tied to what account of environmental values is most justified. Character traits would be justified as virtues on a biocentric or holistic value system. So it would vary different from those that would be justified on a strong anthropocentric value system. Although virtue ethic has recently grown in prominence within environmental ethics, it is by no means the dominant view. However, even among those who reject virtue ethics approach to environmental ethics in favor of consequentialism, deontology, or pragmatism, there is now widespread recognition that attention to character is crucial for addressing our ecological challenges. What kind of people we are matters because our character traits affect whether we act virtuously, bring about good consequences, and do our duty. Moreover, good environmental character is often beneficial to its possessor by fostering connection to place, opening her to rewarding and meaningful experiences, and making living an ethically good life more enjoyable.
Good day everyone, I am Teresa May Roca and I'm going to discuss today what is research ethics. But first, let us define what is research and what is ethics. So research here is a process of systematic inquiry that entails collection of data, documentation of critical information, and analysis and interpretation of that data or information in accordance with suitable methodologies set by specific professional fields and academic disciplines. So basically, research is knowing something you want to know and gathering the information or the data that you've collected from your research and gathering it all together, analyzing the information that you've gathered and forming conclusion from what you've researched. So, research is conducted to evaluate the validity of a hypothesis or an interpretive framework, to assemble a body of substantive knowledge and findings for sharing them in appropriate manners, and to help generate questions for further inquiries. Next, let us define what is ethics. So, ethics here is based on well-founded standards of right and wrong that prescribe what humans ought to do, usually in terms of rights, obligations, benefits to society, fairness, or specific virtues. So, there are two things that we need to remember when talking about ethics. First, ethics refers to well-founded standards of right and wrong that prescribe what humans ought to do, usually in terms of rights, obligations, benefits to society, fairness, or specific virtues. So, for example, humans are obligated to refrain from doing bad deeds such as rape, stealing, committing fraud, etc. It also includes human virtues such as compassion, honesty, loyalty, and it also includes rights of a human such as right to freedom, right to life, and right to privacy. Secondly, ethics refers to the study and development of one's ethical standards. As mentioned above, feelings, laws, and social norms can deviate from what is ethical. So, ethics here in the second point talks about constant examination of one's standard so that these standards are well founded and are reasonable. So next, let us define what is research ethics. So research ethics refers to a wide variety of values, norms, and institutional arrangements that help constitute and regulate scientific activities. Research ethics is a codification of scientific morality in practice. So, guidelines for research ethics specify the basic norms and values of the research community. They are based on general ethics of science, just as general ethics is based on the morality of society at large. So basically, research ethics is talking about the research community in which they use specific norms, values, standards that are being practiced in the research community so that it creates no harm to others and to the society at large. So, why is research ethics important? So, research ethics are important for a number of reasons. First, they promote the aims of research, such as expanding knowledge. So, when we're talking about research, we're also talking about additional knowledge. Next, they support the values required for collaborative work, such as mutual respect and fairness. So, in research, there is a big possibility that you will be working in group. That is why mutual respect and fairness in the group is very important. Next, they mean that researchers can be held accountable for their actions. It's because research work is sometimes shared to the public, so that is why they need to ensure that there are no misconduct that is happening in their research that could harm other people or that could harm the public. Next, they ensure that the public can trust research, and lastly, they support important social and moral values such as the principle of doing no harm to others. So here is a table showing the do's and don'ts of research ethics. So we have the do's. So maintaining a good record of all your research activities and report your data as carefully and objectively as possible. Next, disclose financial or personal interests that may directly or indirectly affect your work. Next, treat animals with care and respect when studying them in your research and adhere to ethical guidelines. And lastly, respect intellectual property, privacy, and confidentiality, and give proper credit for any contributions from other researchers. So, um, the last part is very important to give proper credit. It's because there is a law concerning this, and you may get sued if you will not give proper credits to the owners of the intellectual property, privacy, or confidentiality of others because it is considered as stealing. So, next is the don'ts. So, first, fabrication, manipulation, or misrepresentation of data, deceiving research sponsors, colleagues, or ethical committees by having bias in data interpretation, peer review, or personal decisions. So, in doing research, there should be no bias involved. And next, use any external research data, published or unpublished, without permission. It is a big no because it is considered as stealing because it is not your work, and should give proper credits for it if you're going to use their um, if you're going to use the external research data. And lastly, support responsible publication practices. Your main goal should be to advance science and share your knowledge within the community.
To continue with the report, we have here examples of research ethics. Number one, we have informed consent. The researcher should ensure that the participants in the study are informed of the study's goal and process before they begin. It is important to take note that when you approach a respondent, you must inform them about or what the research is all about, the research procedure, the purposes, risk and benefit, expected alternative procedures, and a statement allowing the participant to ask questions and withdraw from the study at any time in order for them to know the risk and expected benefits they can get from the research, and for them to have like choice or freedom to either decline to participate in the study or to actually participate in the research. Next is confidentiality and anonymity. Any information submitted by the participants should not be revealed by the researchers. Individual and group study participant requests for anonymity should be respected, as should participant needs for the confidentiality of information and personal data. So some respondent will ask you to not disclose their names, who they are, their age, and their personal data. So you must respect it and not disclose those gathered personal informations from them to any persons or unauthorized persons that are outside from your research study. You must respect them. You must not violate their right to confidentiality. Next is non-maleficence and beneficence. No one should be harmed as a result of a study. Research should be valuable and provide benefits that outweigh any risk or negative consequences. Researchers should strive to increase the research utility while reducing the risk of damage to participants and researchers. Robust safeguards should be taken to mitigate any potential risk or injury. So this example of ethics talks about outweighing the risk. Risk should not be greater than the benefits they can get from the studies. One of I like some of the examples of risk are like physiological or physical pain or injury. Those are common types of harms to research participants. Discovering what will in fact provide a benefit may require exposing persons to some risk. So, when there is a benefit, there is a risk. However, there is a quote that says from a book that I've read that says the greatest risk is not taking risk at all. So, with careful evaluation, the researcher must carefully like consider if they should continue with this approach, if the risk if the benefits they can or the participants can get is greater than the risk that will cause the or that or like the harm the participants can get from the research. Conducting research without like any risk of causing harm would prevent many improvements in human welfare. So again, the greatest risk is not taking risk at all. Where the participant may benefit directly through the research, such risks are more justifiable. Again, with careful you need to have a careful evaluation before taking an action. Next is distributive justice. Okay, we have distributive justice. Any study should not favor one group or another, particularly the disfranchised and oppressed. Research should be conducted in the same way that it is conducted between diverse members or groups in society. Equal treatment is a fundamental element of justice in research. This is another manifestation of the notion of human dignity. So, an injustice will occur when some benefit to which a person is entitled is denied to them without good reason, or when some burden is imposed unduly on them. So, for example, like the right to confidentiality. Like there is, you have a respondent who is rich, and you also have a respondent who is very unfortunate, but you choose to disclose those the personal informations of the unfortunate respondents to unauthorized persons just because they are unfortunate. You you choose to protect the personal data of the rich respondent because they told you to do so. So there is no equal treatment in that case. Either with whether the respondent is poor or rich, you must treat them with equality. Okay. Next is respect for persons, autonomy, and protecting those with diminished autonomy. All research subjects must give their consent voluntarily without compulsion or undue influence, and their rights, dignity, and autonomy must be respected and adequately protected. When we say autonomous person, it is a person who is capable of deliberation about personal goals and of acting under the direction of such deliberation. To respect autonomy is to give weight to autonomous persons' considered opinions and choices while refraining from obstructing their actions unless they are clearly detrimental to others. Just what I've said earlier. If the respondent or the person choose to decline in participating the research, then you must respect their decisions. You must not force them to participate in the research just because you need more respondents to participate. So it is a basic concept to respect a person's decisions. Since we are all humans, then we must act like one. Respect their rights, their dignity, their decisions, and not force them to do anything. Next is integrity. When we say integrity, research should be planned, reviewed, and carried out to ensure that established standards of integrity are met, as well as quality and transparency. So examples of like integrity, like examples of unacceptable practices include fabrication by the creation of false data or other aspects of research. So you must have integrity. You must not fabricate the data collected just so your research will be favorable to you. You must disclose what you have gathered, what the respondents actually said to you, or give informations that the respondents gave to you, and to not do anything that could lead in misrepresentation of data. For example, suppression of relevant findings and or data, or knowingly or recklessly or by gross negligence presenting a flawed interpretation of data. Researchers must have integrity, or like all humans must have integrity. Lastly, we have conflict of interest. Research should be transparent about its independence, and any conflicts of interest or partiality should be disclosed. When a researcher's commitment to the institution or a funder to conduct research independently is jeopardized or appears to be jeopardized, a conflict of interest exists. There, this can be a conflict of interest. The conflict of interest can be because of, like, when one researcher thinks that they can, or she can obtain a personal gain or a gain to a member of their family or another person to whom they have a close personal relationship arising from the research. So as a researcher, you must have uh, an equal treatment, a objective approach in, or you have an objective approach in conducting a research. So there may be an appearance of like conflict of interest even when no conflict actually exists. Researchers must disclose anything that may be perceived by others a potential conflict of interests. Transparency is also important. You need to disclose all informations that are necessary for them to know. You must not, like, intentionally suppress any informations that are necessary in your research. So all those talks about ethics, either in business, in environment, in research, these are one or necessary like behavior for human to have, because again, we are all humans. We need to act like one. We must always abide in the code of ethics. I hope you learned something from our discussion, and thank you. Have a good day.